August 14, 2018. A quiet suburban neighborhood in Colorado wakes up to flashing police lights. A pregnant mother is missing. 2 little girls are gone, and standing on the front porch is a husband asking for help. He looks calm, too calm. He tells reporters he just wants his family home. He says he has no idea where they are, but behind that steady voice, behind that controlled expression, was a secret that would horrify the entire country, because within just a few days, investigators would uncover a truth so disturbing that people watching that interview would replay it again and again, realizing they were looking at a man who already knew exactly what happened. And what he did next would make this one of the most chilling family crimes in modern history. Chris Watts lived in Frederick, Colorado, a quiet suburban town where nothing ever seemed out of place. He worked in the oil industry. He was described as quiet, polite, reserved. At home, he had what many people would call the perfect life. A wife, Shanann Watts, 2 young daughters, Bella and Celeste, and Shanann was 15 weeks pregnant with their 3rd child, a baby boy. On social media, their life looked almost picture perfect. Shanann regularly posted videos of birthday parties, family vacations, and everyday moments with the girls. There were smiles, laughter, matching outfits, playful dances in the kitchen. From the outside, they looked happy, stable, normal. But what cameras didn't capture was the growing tension inside the house. Financial stress had been building. Arguments had become more frequent. And over the summer of 2018, Chris began pulling away emotionally. Then he started an affair with a coworker, and slowly he began imagining a different life. A life without debt, without responsibility, without the family he once built everything around. On August 13, 2018, Shanann Watts returned home from a business trip just after 2 a.m. Security footage later confirmed she walked inside the house. That would be the last time she was ever seen alive. By morning, something was already wrong. Shanann missed a scheduled doctor's appointment, something her friend said she would never do. She wasn't answering texts, she wasn't returning calls. Her phone was still inside the house. Her purse sat on the kitchen counter. Her car was parked in the garage. Everything she would need was still there. There was no sign she packed to leave, no note, no message, nothing. By early afternoon, her close friend became deeply concerned. The silence wasn't normal, so she did something that would change the course of the case. She called the police. When officers arrived at the Watts home, Chris was there. Questions calmly. Something about his demeanor felt off. He didn't appear panicked. He didn't seem frantic, just composed. Too composed. Officers searched the house. There were no signs of forced entry, no visible struggle, no broken windows, no damaged doors. It looked like no one had broken in. And then, a neighbor showed police something important: security footage from his home. It showed Chris backing his truck into the driveway early that morning, right up close to the garage. That detail would later become critical because it was the first clue that the story being told wasn't the truth. That same day, with his wife and daughters still missing, Chris Watts stood on his front porch and spoke to the media. Cameras were rolling. Neighbors were watching. He looked directly into the lens and asked for his family to come home. He smiled awkwardly at moments. He swayed slightly back and forth. At one point he said, "If they're watching this, just come back. I need you back." On the surface, it sounded like a worried husband, but something didn't sit right. There were no tears, no shaking voice, no visible panic, just a steady tone and controlled composure. Later, body language experts would analyze that interview frame by frame. They pointed out the lack of urgency, the nervous smiling, the way he spoke about his family in the past tense. And as the clips spread online, the internet started noticing too. Within hours, suspicion began building fast. 2 days later, investigators asked Chris Watts to take a polygraph test. He agreed almost immediately, calm, confident, cooperative. He told detectives he had nothing to hide. Before the test began, an officer explained how it worked. Chris nodded along. He said he understood. The examiner told him it was clear he wasn't being truthful. That's when the atmosphere in the room shifted. Detectives leaned in. They told him they knew he wasn't telling the whole story. At first, his explanation changed. He claimed Shanann had hurt the children, and in a moment of rage, he reacted, but investigators weren't convinced. The pressure built, the silence grew heavier, and eventually, Chris Watts broke. He confessed.
She heard him? Yeah. And
After hours of questioning, Chris Watts finally admitted the truth. He confessed that he had strangled Shanann in their bedroom during an argument in the early morning hours. Their 2 daughters were still inside the home. He then loaded Shanann's body into his truck and drove to a remote oil site where he worked. What happened next made the case even more disturbing. At that location, he took the lives of his 2 young daughters. He buried Shanann in a shallow grave nearby and concealed the children's bodies at the work site. Investigators later confirmed this was not a sudden accident. It was planned. And what shocked the public even more was that just hours after these events, he stood in front of cameras, pretending to be a worried husband, asking for his family to come home. What shocked people most wasn't just the crime itself, it was how normal he seemed. There were no warning signs that neighbors could point to, no history of violence, no prior arrests, no explosive arguments spilling out into the street. Neighbors described him as quiet, polite, friendly, the kind of man who waved when you drove by, the kind of father who played with his kids in the front yard. Nothing about him suggested something this dark was possible, and that's what made the case even more disturbing. Experts later tried to understand what might have been happening beneath the surface. There were reports of financial pressure, tension inside the marriage, and an affair that had grown serious. Some believed he felt trapped, overwhelmed, desperate for a fresh start. But instead of choosing separation, instead of choosing divorce, he chose something irreversible, a decision driven by selfishness and deception, one that destroyed his family and ultimately cost him everything. Chris Watts eventually pleaded guilty to all charges. There was no lengthy trial, no dramatic courtroom battle, no last-minute defense, just a quiet admission of guilt. In November 2018, he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The judge described the crime as incomprehensible. Family members spoke in court expressing grief that would never truly fade. The Watts home was later sold. New owners moved in, and the town of Frederick slowly tried to return to normal. But for many people, the case never really ended. It remains one of the most disturbing family crimes in recent American history, because it forces a deeply unsettling question. How well do we truly know the people closest to us? If you think this case was shocking, there are others where the truth was hidden in plain sight. Interviews that fooled millions, smiles that masked something darker, and stories where the person asking for help was the one responsible all along. In the next video, we're breaking down another case where the cameras were rolling, but nobody realized what they were really seeing.